Good morning. My design project is from the studio Between Fracture and Fold. The studio mandated us to derive a concept from our personal experiences of the pandemic and use that concept as a source for the design intervention on the site. COVID-19 pandemic affected everyone psychologically and socially. The prolonged social isolation, the forbiddance, and our disconnect with the nature increased the stress experience. The gradual lifting of restrictions allowed us to reclaim a connection with the outside world. The sequential events of the pandemic and the observation of the gradual transition etched in my memory is expressed through these sketches. From dark gloominess of the pandemic lockdown in the first sketch, to the slow easing of restrictions portrayed by increasing porosity of the wall, to final vestiges of the pandemic leading to our total reconnect with the nature and outdoors, with the wall totally disappearing. These sketches were translated into abstract diagrams, first in sequences, then in the form of a seamless grid. The evolution metaphor of a pandemic is depicted by changing degrees of enclosure. The simultaneous takeover of the green reinforces my connect with the nature as the lockdown lifts. Poveglia is a small island located near Venice, Italy. For more than 100 years, the island was used as a quarantine station for those suffering from the plague and other diseases. It was abandoned in 1968. The brief was to design a cemetery, not intended as a burial ground, rather a space to house the remains like the Modena Cemetery by Aldo Rossi. Functions like a memorial, multi-faith chapel, etc. were given to enhance design exploration. The emphasis was on making a public space for the city of Venice. The design process started with a grid placed on the site. The grid cells multiplied into bigger units, eventually breaking up and disintegrating into the landscape. Multiple iterations rendered a seamless, fluidic, and impactful three-dimension transition of the disintegration, with the nature slowly taking over. All spaces were connected at various levels in a continuous circulation, which, apart from guiding the visitors, also gave freedom to design their own itinerary. Visualizing that the linearity of the journey would make the experience much more impactful and stronger, the space along the existing wall was chosen to place my intervention as it rendered desired flexibility. The cemetery started as a solid tube, which was worked upon to gradually disintegrate along its length. Subsequently, this tube grid was broken into parts, staggered, and resized to get the required emphasis on the gradual disintegration of the structure. The staggering of the structure allowed an axis to be formed between the Columbarium and the memorial, which was taken out into the sea. This axis also guides the visitors upon arrival into the main journey. The disintegrating theme is quite evident here. The visitors arriving at the ferry terminal could turn towards the memorial or turn towards the main journey through the Columbarium or take a direct access to the waterfront plaza from here. The Columbarium leads to the Funerary Chapel, which then transitions into the Congregation Hall. Then after visiting the Multi-Faith Chapel, they arrive back at the waterfront plaza. The first floor of the Congregation Hall leads to the bridge that connects the existing long building, housing the Visitors Center. The bridge also branches off to connect to an adjacent building which houses the library, research center, and admin. The section at the bottom is a long section through the main journey. The disintegration of the structure can be seen. Also evident is the changing heights of the structure till it goes completely underground with the multi-faith chapel. The beginning of the journey, the rigid grid, is a columbarium. All the elements inside the columbarium, the shells to house the urns, the column beam structure, the courtyards, and the openings all follow the disintegrating grid. The plan in the top right shows the placement of the mentioned elements in a completely rigid grid on the left end with no openings. As one moves towards the right, the courtyard starts deforming, losing its rigidity, so does the placement of shells. The openings also gradually become larger and larger, letting in more and more light. The changing sense of enclosure is also followed in the materiality of the space. The columbarium is made of reinforced concrete, a visually heavy material. Here the distinction between the rigid courtyard and the disintegrated courtyard is clearly visible in the top two blow-ups. Bottom right is a landscape feature alongside the columbarium, emphasizing the grid. The columbarium gradually transitions into the Funerary Chapel. It consists of a metal grid structure with glass envelope in which concrete boxes of prayer halls are suspended. The space acts as an intersection of merging of the two material palette, complete concrete space of the columbarium to glass and metal structure of the Congregation Hall. The Congregation Hall is the last space of the continuous structure. It follows the biggest unit of the grid. The metal grid structure gets completely disintegrated by the end, extending out to become landscape elements. The hall is covered with vegetation and is completely engulfed by it towards the end. The central hall is enveloped with glass with open circulation on the periphery on two levels. The constructed openings in Columbarium gradually enlarges, transitioning into the Funerary Chapel. The lowering heights of the spaces are also evident here. The disintegration of the structure is gradual and fluidate between the spaces, from more enclosed to less enclosed space as alongside the green starts taking over. The disintegrating structure extends to form the small landscape, a breathing space before the multi-faith chapel. After the lowering heights of the structure reaches the ground, the space now enters underground. A couple of trees enters the space, playing a much more serene role. The vegetation overtaking the structure earlier is now allowed to run over this chapel, forming an accessible landscape on its roof. The roof structure also follows the disintegrating grid, but is above the ground level. Crossing the multi-faith chapel, the disintegrating structure is now left as an insert in the landscape of the waterfront plaza. This space acts as an open pause point after experiencing the journey. The axis connecting the columbarium to the memorial can also be seen here. This long section shows the circulation bridge connecting the first floor walkway of the congregation hall to the existing building. The bridge runs along the length of the existing long building till the visitors center, located at the end of this building. Along its length, the bridge also connects to the glass elevator shaft that connects the different levels of the bell tower. The arches of the bridge were influenced by the arches on one of the nearby existing buildings. Seen here is the bell tower and a memorial that used the bell tower as a clue to its design. The bell tower is a prominent feature of the island's skyline and has historical significance. The memorial placed on the other end of the axis was designed on the concept of from being to nothing and presence of the absence. The metal grid built around the bell tower gets divided and subdivided into smaller grids as it goes higher up, gets pixelated, disintegrating as it gets further away. Finally, the conceptual bell tower is removed and the positive space of the bell tower becomes a negative space. Presence is shown by the pixelation of the scaffolding, while the void is a silhouette of the bell tower. Visitors can travel through the elevator and observe the void by standing on the viewing platforms provided at different levels. Thank you.